Today, we are setting sail across the North Sea to explore a civilization whose name alone conjures images of fury, exploration, and myth.
The Vikings.
The popular image of the Viking, the brute, the barbarian, clad in a horned helmet, is a powerful yet misleading caricature. That horned helmet? It's a complete fiction, invented by 19th century romanticists and cemented by an opera costume designer in 1876. Our goal today is to strip away the theatrical costume and confront the far more complex and compelling reality. The Vikings were not just raiders. They were also farmers, shipbuilders, poets, traders, and lawmakers who fundamentally terraformed the landscape of European politics, economics, and culture. Their influence spanned from Constantinople to North America. Their time, the Viking Age, is conventionally dated from 793 CE, when they shocked the Christian world by sacking the undefended Lindisfarne monastery, to 1066 CE. But the story began even earlier, with seafaring, trading, and plundering occurring decades before Lindisfarne. To truly understand this remarkable era, we must start with the most frustrating part of all, the name itself.
The word Viking is immensely frustrating because its modern usage is highly problematic. The term often gets applied as a catch-all for medieval Scandinavia, but its true meaning is far narrower. Viking, or V-king, is the act or profession of raiding, essentially being a pirate. A V-kinger was a person who went out to sea on these expeditions. So, if a farmer from Sweden spent the summer raiding the Baltic, he was merely going a Viking, e-Viking, making him a V-kinger. The people we study didn't call themselves Vikings in the all-encompassing sense we use today. Their victims, the Europeans on the receiving end, called them Northmen, Danes, most commonly regardless of their origin, or simply Rus. So, while Scandinavian does not by default equal Viking, their overwhelming historical impact and cool factor earned them top billing. The society that produced these formidable travelers was rigidly stratified. At the bottom were thralls, slaves, considered chattel with no legal rights. The backbone was the carls, freemen, the farmers, craftsmen, and traders who formed the majority and were protected by law. It was from this armed class that most warriors who went raiding were drawn, seeking wealth and status. At the apex were the jarls, the aristocracy, the wealthy chieftains who led raids and commanded political power. Crucially, Norse society was governed by
The Thing.
This was a representative assembly of free men that served as a court of law and a parliament, settling disputes and making laws. This system provided a crucial formal alternative to endless blood feuds. But what motivated a small subset of Scandinavians to risk everything and leave their challenging homeland, a tough place to traverse with mountains and dense forests, to set sail? The expansion wasn't just about overpopulation, which has largely been discredited. It was a perfect storm of factors. First, political centralization. Rising kings like Harald Fairhair created displaced warrior nobles looking to recapture wealth and status, or independent chieftains choosing emigration over subjugation. Second, economic incentive. After centuries of bartering, Europe was recovering from the fall of Rome, and complex trade systems were bringing forth portable, lootable luxury goods, especially silver and precious stones. And third, technological superiority. Above all else, the Viking Age was enabled by one revolutionary piece of technology.
The Longship was the central technology of the age, a masterpiece of naval engineering that gave the Norsemen a decisive strategic advantage. Without it, the Viking Age would have been inconceivable. Developed in the enclosed Baltic Sea, the Scandinavians became wizards at woodworking and shipbuilding.
What made the Longship brilliant?
Clinker-built hull, constructed using overlapping planks that were cleaved, not sawn, from green oak. This created a hull that was not rigid but incredibly flexible, allowing the ship to bend and ride with the powerful swells of the open ocean, absorbing the energy of waves that would shatter other ships. Shallow draft. This was the strategic game changer. A fully loaded longship could float in as little as 1 meter of water. This meant they could cross the storming North Sea and row along shallow European rivers, appearing deep inland where no defense was prepared. Versatility and speed. Propelled by a single large square sail and oars, the longship was remarkably fast, capable of reaching speeds of up to 17 knots under favorable conditions. Its double-ended, symmetrical design allowed it to reverse direction quickly without having to turn around, vital for navigating treacherous waters or making a swift retreat after a raid. When the longships landed, the resulting battle was built around cohesion and shock. The average Viking warrior was likely a farmer, a carl, who possessed little armor, relying instead on his shield. The round shield was the single most important piece of defensive equipment. Their primary weapons were the cheap and versatile spear and the ubiquitous axe. The sword was expensive, serving primarily as a status symbol for the wealthy. In battle, their main tactic was the shield wall, skjaldborg, where warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, interlocking their shields to create an impenetrable defensive barrier. Armed with this technology and driven by ambition, the Northmen set their sights in every direction.
The westward expansion began violently.
With raids on coastal monasteries in the British Isles. But mere raiding quickly evolved into conquest and state building.
In 865 CE,
The Great Heathen Army, a coalition of Norse warriors, landed in England, devastating the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. They quickly conquered Northumbria, East Anglia, and much of Mercia. Unlike in Normandy, they weren't able to establish a single proper state, but they established a rule book for the land they conquered, known as the Danelaw. Here, Norse law and customs prevailed, and the city of York was transformed into the bustling trade hub of Jorvik, Jorvik. The Danes' eventual influence led to Danish kings like Canute the Great, Canute, ruling all of England in the early 11th century. Across the Irish Sea, the Norse had immense impact. They founded coastal merchant towns at river basins, which became major slave trading hubs. The most successful city they established was Dublin. Though Norse power in Ireland was eventually ended, the Norse presence radically changed the island, linking it into trade networks that stretched as far as Anatolia. On the European continent, the wealth of the Carolingian Empire was an irresistible target. Because their ships could sail up the Seine and Loire rivers, Vikings struck deep into the interior, sacking cities like Paris. The Frankish king's response was often to pay off the invaders with massive tributes of silver, known as Danegeld. This only sent a signal that sacking a city and demanding a bribe was far more profitable than pillaging monasteries. This disastrous situation led to a strategic pivot in 911 CE. King Charles the Simple granted land to the powerful Viking leader Rollo. In exchange for Rollo's conversion and an oath of fealty, he was tasked with defending the region from other Vikings. This land became the Duchy of Normandy, the land of the Northmen. Rollo's descendants quickly assimilated, adopting French language and Christianity, but retaining their formidable martial identity. They became the Normans, a group that would change European history. The Norse drive for land and freedom didn't stop in Europe. They discovered and settled the uninhabited island of Iceland around 870 CE, forming a unique quasi-democratic island assembly called the Althing. Exiled from Iceland, Eric the Red pushed further, establishing a Norse colony in Greenland around 980 CE. The final westward leap was made by Eric the Red's son, Leif Erikson, who sailed to North America around 1000 CE. They called this resource-rich land Vineland. Archaeological evidence confirms the Norse presence at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada. However, conflict with the indigenous people they called Skrællingar, screamers or dried skins, and the difficult environment meant the settlement was short-lived, passing largely into myth.
While Norwegians and Danes dominated the West,
The Swedes primarily drove the eastern expansion. Known in the East as Varangians, or the Rus, they were drawn by the immense wealth of the Byzantine and Abbasid empires. Their highways were the great river systems of Eastern Europe, the Volga, leading to the Caspian Sea and the markets of Baghdad, and the Dnieper, flowing to the Black Sea and the magnificent city of Constantinople. Their shallow draft ships were perfect for river navigation, allowing them to drag vessels across land to switch waterways. The Rus established a powerful trade network, exchanging northern goods like furs, honey, amber, and most critically, slaves, for Arab silver dirhams and Byzantine silk. Massive hoards of Arab coins discovered in Scandinavia attest to this extensive trade. Around the mid-800s, Scandinavians built up trading towns along the Dnieper, such as Kiev. They soon came face to face with the biggest and shiniest city in the Christian world, Constantinople. Being the Vikings, they tried to sack it. The Byzantines, however, had the benefit of actual defenses, big walls, and weapons like Greek fire, a petroleum-based combustible sprayed from nozzles which Viking longships had no defense against. Though the raids failed, they impressed the Byzantine. The emperor, Michael the Drunkard, hired the Vikings as elite mercenaries, forming the famous Varangian Guard. These warriors were renowned for their effectiveness in battle, often wielding great two-handed axes, and served as the emperor's personal bodyguards. Through trade and military service, the Rus elite, who were always a minority population among the native Slavs and Finns, gradually adopted Christian models and imperial administration. Rurik's dynasty established the Kievan Rus, the historical precursor to modern Russia. One pivotal ruler was Olga of Kiev, who forged close ties with Constantinople and converted to Eastern Christianity. In the East, the arrival of the militarily organized Rus provided the catalyst for state formation, unifying disparate Slavic tribes among the trade routes. This shift from trade elite to ruling dynasty was one of the most foundational outcomes of the Viking Age.
The spiritual world of the Norse was complex, structured around Yggdrasil, the colossal ash tree connecting the 9 worlds. Their destiny was governed by an unchangeable fate determined by the Nornes. The pantheon included the Aesir, gods of war and order, and the Vanir, gods of fertility and nature. Key figures included Odin, the All-Father, god of war, wisdom, poetry, and magic, who sacrificed an eye for knowledge. Thor, the protector of Midgard, god of thunder, and a straightforward warrior popular among the common people. Loki, the trickster god, a figure of chaos whose actions would lead to disaster. Their mythology was defined by Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, a prophesized, final, cataclysmic battle that would destroy the world. However, this was not an absolute end. It was a cycle foretold to be followed by a world reborn, green and fertile. This reflects a worldview that values courage in the face of an unavoidable violent end. The Norse afterlife was far more varied than just Valhalla. Destiny was determined by the manner of death, not moral judgment. Valhalla, presided over by Odin, this was the destination for the most elite warriors, the Einherjar, chosen by the Valkyries. Life here was an endless training session, fighting all day, feasting all night, and healing by morning, preparing for Ragnarok. Folkvanger, the goddess Freyr, claimed half of the battle slain for her hall. Hel, the most common destination, ruled by Loki's daughter. This was a shadowy realm for those who died of sickness or old age, described as a gray and uneventful continuation of existence, not a place of Christian-style punishment.
The Vikings left very few written records of their own during the Viking Age,
largely relying on the angular, 16-character Younger Futhark alphabet for short inscriptions on memorial stones and artifacts. Our deepest understanding of Norse mythology and culture comes from the sagas and Eddas, which were written down centuries later in Iceland, after the conversion to Christianity. These sources, like the Poetic Edda and Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda, blend historical events with legendary elements, providing invaluable, if filtered, insights into the Norse world.
The Viking Age did not end with a sudden collapse. It ended because the conditions that made raiding possible and profitable ceased to exist. The Vikings were not wiped out, but assimilated and evolved. Several factors drove this decline. First, political centralization. Petty kingdoms consolidated into the strong, centralized monarchies of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Kings curbed the autonomy of local jarls, and warfare became the exclusive right of the crown. Second, Christianization. As local leaders adopted Christianity, often for political gain, like Harald Bluetooth, the cultural and religious gap that justified the easy plunder of fellow Christians narrowed dramatically. And third, European resistance. Victims learned to defend themselves. Kingdoms like England, under Alfred the Great, who built fortified towns called burhs, became militarily organized, making raiding a riskier, less profitable enterprise. The traditional end date, 1066 CE, provides a perfect, profound irony. That year, 3 different heirs to the Viking legacy fought for the crown of England. First, Harald Hardrada, the warrior king of Norway, a true Viking adventurer who had commanded the Varangian Guard, invaded England. His was the last great Norwegian invasion. He was defeated and killed by the Anglo-Saxon king Harald Godwinson at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Godwinson was himself a product of Anglo-Scandinavian integration. But Godwinson's triumph was short-lived. 3 weeks later, he was conquered at the Battle of Hastings by William, Duke of Normandy. William was a direct descendant of the Viking chieftain Rollo. The year 1066 marked the definitive victory of the settled, state-building Viking, William and the Normans, over the raiding Viking, Hardrada, cementing the absorption of the Norse world into medieval Europe.
the legacy of the Vikings is indelible.
They left an invisible empire embedded in the world we know today. Language. The settlement of the Danelaw led to the borrowing of hundreds of fundamental everyday words into English, including law, husband, skull, sky, egg, get, give, take, and die.
They also contributed the essential pronouns they, them, and their. Law and identity. Scandinavian place names, like those ending in by or thorp, dot the English map, and modern populations in settlement zones carry a significant percentage of Scandinavian genetic heritage. The Vikings did not just raid and leave. They stayed, intermarried, and became a foundational element of modern European society. Their journey from pagan terror to heroic ancestor proves that history only gets cooler the more we look beyond known history. Thank you for watching. If you want to continue exploring the complexities of the past, be sure to subscribe.